2012, and we're meeting as a committee of the whole to review the budget.
No, we're not.
Please rise and join me in the pledge.
Okay.
Glass of water.
If we could, but I figured I'll sit here. Okay, as clerk, I'm going to call the roll to make sure we have a quorum. Pezza?
Here.
Gutenkopf?
Here.
Leader? Absent. Dunn? Absent. Graham?
Here.
Polumsky? Here. York?
Here.
Pipskin?
Here.
Healy? Absent. Levin?
Here.
Kennedy? Absent. Morley?
Here.
Wagner?
Here.
Mulliner?
Here.
It's like 10 present, 4 absent. Now I'd like to entertain a motion for us to appoint Alderman Mulliner as Mayor Pro Tem tonight in the absence of Mayor DeCiani to preside over tonight's budget. Alderman Graham moves. Alderman Gutenkopf seconds. Went to the other side of the aisle. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? The motion carries. I'll turn the gavel over to Mayor Pro Tem Mulliner.
I want to start off by making sure that there's nobody in the audience who wants to make public comment, which doesn't appear as if there is. Nobody signed up, so we're going to go past that item. Next, we'd like to ask to begin the budget hearing. We're going to start with legal. City Manager.
Thank you. I know the city attorney is here somewhere to go through the budget, but I guess what we'll do is ask if there's any questions.
Here he is.
Here he is.
To start, and once Mr. Storino gets here. Evening. Evening.
Any questions about legal, or do you want to make any comments?
My name is Donald Storino. I'm the city attorney for the city of Elmhurst.
Can't hear you, Don.
And pleased to be the city attorney for the city of Elmhurst. We're conscious of the efforts on the part of the staff to try to keep our legal budget as conservative as we possibly can. And to that effort, we try to be as efficient as we can. I think that we have worked closely with the staff to try to Elmhurstize ourselves and have done, I think, a pretty credible job of that. We have held the rates for the city stable and flat since we came over the last 3 years. And we're pleased that we can do that and hope that that we can continue to do that. From my conversations with Marilyn, we think that we can keep the budget pretty much in line with where it's been last year. But I'm happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Any questions? Alderman Graham?
Thank you. The only question I have, we've been doing adjudication for a year or two now. I don't know how long that's been. And without referencing the revenue side of things, is it beneficial to the city of Elmhurst to be doing adjudication compared to what we used to do, which was not doing it within the city of Elmhurst? So if you can just speak to that.
Sure. I don't have the exact numbers, and Marilyn, please correct me, but I think that the city is very well served doing the adjudication from two standpoints. I think it has resulted in a significant amount of fines that exceed the cost, meaning the fees that are charged to the city by the adjudicator, who is an attorney who attends once, not from our firm. But I think you would see that the fines far exceed that, but we are also way more efficient in terms of how we handle matters that come before the city. We're more efficient in how we can staff and allocate time, both being police officers and people that have to testify at the adjudication. They come here, they don't have to go to County Farm Road. So I think there are a lot of benefits that don't show up just in the numbers, but if you're asking Alderman just about the numbers, we're very, very much on the positive side of revenues versus expenses.
Thank you.
Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. Does that also apply to or include the DUI prosecutions?
It does. That's a much more complicated analysis. The adjudication is really pretty straightforward, pretty easy analysis, and I'm real comfortable saying all the things I just said to Alderman Bram. I am confident that we're all the same things we are with adjudication. That is efficient staffing. We get lots of value in all that, but you have to look at a much bigger scope or field in analyzing the DUIs. But doing that because payments and fines don't come in until substantially after. Likewise, we don't do that for the city. Another firm does, but they do a fine job. And if you look at that, you're going to see that the revenues exceed the expenses and have all the other values in terms of allocating time and scheduling, et cetera, for our police department.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Levin?
Yeah, it's kind of a minor one, but the court reporting line item seems to have gone down to 0. Are we doing something else other than using court reporters? Or that we just don't see any proceedings where they're going to be needed?
I don't know that I can speak to that. We'll probably need some court reporters. I don't think that we've used, I think we've been conservative and have not had a high incidence of using court reporters. I don't know that it'd be 0 though.
Go ahead, Alan.
Really, it's somewhat a difference in billing. Prior city attorneys, it was billed separately, so it was easy to put on a separate line item. The current billing, it's there, but it's not as prominent. And frankly, I agree with Don that the dollars aren't that significant. They're not significant enough to have a separate line item. So we're just phasing that line item out. So to the extent that there are dollars related and they come through the city attorney's bills, they're going to be on the 3036 line.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the fire. Oh, somebody? Okay. Alderman Dunn.
Just a quick question. I noticed on the AP reports that we get in our council packet, the legal fees tend to be in the 100,000 range or so. They're not, I mean, our budget for next year being $548,000. Is there another pot that we're paying the accounts payable out of? Because those numbers I'm seeing on a regular basis seem to be a lot larger than what the budget I see here.
The monthly bills we receive from Storino, Romello, and Durkin probably are in the neighborhood of anywhere from 30 to 45,000, depending on what's going on in that month. Most of those costs are going to show up in the lines you see on this page, but some costs will be in the TIF funds. So there are other allocations than just what you see here, and those would be in the TIF funds.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to fire protection. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you. The fire department remains dedicated to preservation of life and property in the city of Elmhurst with a continued focus on training and disaster preparedness. As you are aware, disaster preparedness is not only a national concern, but it's also a local issue. As we saw just recently in southern Illinois and the blizzard we had in 2011, Elmhurst needs to be prepared to stand on its own for at least a short period of time until we get extra resources. So we have a citywide disaster preparedness team who has representation from all different city departments, and we continue to make sure that we meet the federal mandates and all our training requirements and that we are as best prepared as possible for any natural or man-made disaster in Elmhurst. The fire department continues to take advantage of a state-of-the-art training facility up in North York. And just last year, we completed the confined space training prop as part of that. And we don't only train our firefighters there, but we also train the public works personnel and the wastewater treatment personnel, so they meet their federal and state mandates as far as required training in confined space. We also continue our Honor Guard program. I'd like to mention that because it's really been a successful program. And just this last year, we had firefighters from as far as northern Alaska come down here to just take our Honor Guard class. So it's been really successful. The firefighters, I mentioned Eric Hedman, who runs most of it, has done a great job. We're getting a lot of support from the American Legion to help us out with that also. So it's been continued to be very successful. Our public education, we also continue to focus on that because I think it's a really important program. Even though we did cut the hours of our public education officers, 2 programs we said we wouldn't cut, and we continue to do them because we think they're both very highly effective. One is that every 4th grade student in Elmhurst in all schools gets the Learn Not to Burn program, which is a 5-week program. And every 1st grader gets what's called Cool Rules for Fire Safety, which the kids really enjoy. We got little kid gear and stuff, they put it on. But it's just the first really time they get to focus on fire safety. And we continue those. I think they're really important, so we want to continue those. Even some of the other programs we've cut back on, like the fire extinguisher programs for some of the businesses and some of the senior programs, we've cut back on some of those. But the school programs we think are really important, and we want to continue to do those within the budget that we're in right now. I also want to mention that our car seat program, our child car seat inspection program, continues to be really successful. And one of the things I want to mention on that is we've also partnered with Elmhurst Hospital on that. Elmhurst Hospital has somewhat donated one of their car seat techs to help us manage the number of requests we have. And so we have one of the employees from Elmhurst Hospital comes to our fire station and helps us do the car seat checks if we don't have one of our technicians available. So I wanted to just make mention of thanks to Elmhurst Hospital on that. For the budget, some of the things you're going to see in here is that we're going to continue of this budget year is we should be implementing the STARCOM 21 radio system. That's the countywide digital system that will allow all public safety agencies to talk to each other. We have common frequencies. Right now, police and fire have difficult time talking. Police to police have difficult time talking. So that system should go into place. I also want to mention that DUCOM, which is the dispatch agency we're part of, it's Consolidated Dispatch. It continues to grow, and in the last 4 years, we've had 11 new agencies come to that. And as time goes on, we should start seeing some savings. You see that the line item went up a little bit, but it went up less than it would have if it was not for the extra agencies that joined it. It's also allowed us to have better dispatch services. We're able to have more dispatchers on duty at any given time. Also, you'll notice in the maintenance and repairs line items, we reduced 4 line items. There were line items that just had minimal amounts of money, about $3,500 in it, but it was one of those hit or miss type line items. So we just took it all and put it into the general repairs and maintenance equipment line item and reduced it by about $3,500. Also, you'll see on 6086, that's the foreign fire tax line item. That was in 6098 in the past. We just added a line item to clarify it so it was more clear as far as what that 6098 was. And I'll be glad to.
Could you repeat that?
6086, that's the foreign fire tax. It was in 6098 in the past. And so we just made an extra line item so it's clear that that's what that money, those funds are in there for. And answer any questions.
Any questions? Alderman Levin?
The first question is, every year we have a significant amount of overtime. And this year, we're estimating it's going to be higher than just about, well, it was high last year, but about $386,000. What causes the overtime?
For this last year, one of the largest causes was firefighter injuries. So there was people that were on the job injury. We therefore replaced them on overtime to keep our staffing levels. That was the main thing. We had a couple longer-term injuries over the last year.
And these are over 40 hours. How does it work with the firefighters, since you have a unique kind of scheduling? When does overtime kick in?
Anything out of their normal work hours, which is the 24/48 schedule.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right. Also, on some of the, like the 4075, and also under other expenses, the 6011 and the 6025, there have been some reasons given maybe last year, the year before, of why those would go up. But I get the feeling that when they go up, like the rescue equipment, there was a specific piece of equipment we bought last year, the year before, but they seem to, then once we buy that specific piece of equipment, they then stay at the higher new level. Same thing on the conferences. I think it was Honor Guard we talked about a year or two ago. It was going to go up specifically for that, but then it stays up at that higher level. Conferences and training was the Honor Guard, I think.
The Honor Guard's a consistent cost. Of that 26,000 projected, 16,700 is geared directly for the Honor Guard class. We hold 2 one-week classes and 2 weekend classes every year, and there's a revenue side to that too, which is more than what our expense side is on that. And it is up slightly a little bit this year, not just because of the Honor Guard class, but we are trying to put a little more training dollars into the budget. There's some conferences that we have not been going to. One is the FDIC, it's a Fire Department Instructor Conference down in Indianapolis. It's probably one of the best training arenas that there is. You can get a lot of training in a short period of time in a couple of days. So we add there is a little bit more money in there than there was in the last year, trying to get some of these training opportunities back into the budget.
All right, and just to follow up, where does the Honor Guard revenue come back in?
I'm not exactly sure what line item it is, but
Miscellaneous revenues.
Miscellaneous.
Revenue section, I think.
It's on page 102. It's a line item. It says fire programs, 371-4200. You'll see a budget of 25,000, and for the most part, that is the Honor Guard program. It's also fees for other programs they may have that require nominal fees, but the bulk of that is for the Honor Guard program.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Bryan?
Thank you. Couple questions. On page 131, the first line item, 1001, full-time salaries. It seems like this year projected, it's going up 10% compared to the previous year. Bless you. In previous years, it was a little bit under 3% increase. Why are we seeing such a significant increase from last year estimated to this year?
well, one of the increases is that due to the new collective bargaining agreement we have, is their holiday pay gets paid different now. The holiday pay is now assigned to the full-time salary line item, and that's a 2% increase in that line item. And then there's contractually a 3% increase in wages.
You said 3% contractually?
Yes.
Do we know where the other 5% is?
I don't, the difference is, unless I'm,
My point being is there's no additional
0.2, it's
salaries or anything along those lines? So far it's contractually
no,
and holiday?
And the estimated amount, there is one vacancy firefighter that's in the estimated amount where it is budgeted in the next year.
Okay, so that's why we see the significant increase then?
From the estimate to the budget, part of it.
Okay, so a filled vacancy?
Correct.
That explains it. Thank you. The next question is on page 133. It's actually about the capital. Central 9503, Central Garage Services. It seems to also have went up significantly, almost, or more than doubled from estimated last year to projected for this fiscal year. I know we discussed capital outlay months ago, what it seems like now. What is the rationale for this?
What we did with that was similar to the IT. It's a different process as far as allocating to different departments, like we did with PCs on the IT side. The software they have now at the Public Works Garage allows them to more accurately assign the cost to the department that uses it. And this is a clear reflection of what the actual Elmhurst Fire Department allocation is of the use of the central garage services, where in the past it was allocated just a percentage. Now
And that's primarily, or if not only, mechanical services, repairing trucks, vehicles, et cetera?
That's correct.
Wow, that's a significant increase. Okay, thank you.
Alderman Wagner?
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on that, does that include fuel at all?
No, fuel's on a different line item.
Not a different line item, okay.
It is 20 some.
That's it, thanks.
Any other questions? Alderman?
Thank you. I have a question about insurance, 7003. Looks like the estimate is at 3,600, and I was wondering why that may be, and, you know, if there's a need to go back up after that to 6,240. It was budgeted as 6,520.
I think we need to look into that and get back to you on that one.
Alderman Morley?
Thank you. I just want to make sure I have my numbers right. For 1001, which is the salaries for full-time. A couple of questions, but as I see it, it's a $221,500 difference between this year's estimate and next year's projection. And I just want to make sure I understand that includes an increase of one salaried employee, a 3% raise, and then a change in how holiday or vacation pay is allocated?
Holiday pay, yes.
And how that's allocated?
How that's allocated. It wasn't, if you see the notice on the overtime, full-time line item has dropped. That's because it used to get paid out of overtime. It's the cost isn't changed any, just the way it's allocated has changed. As so many hours for holiday rather than just a percent of salary.
So the change in the overtime is based on a reallocation of how holidays are accounted for. Is any of that overtime reduction related to the new salaried employee?
No.
Okay. And then follow up, last question as it relates to that. For 2009, 10, 10, 11, 11, 12, were all of those head counts, were we down one every year for the past 3 years, and now we're adding somebody?
No. We only are down last year is the only year we were down, and I believe it was the money, the funds were allocated last year also for that position. The funds have been allocated for that position all throughout. There wasn't an ad this year of one person's salary, but there is on the estimate.
I'm not sure I understand.
It was in the budget, but.
It was in the budget. The dollars were in the budget for that firefighter. We just never hired him.
Has there been an open spot for 3 previous years?
No, the open spot is from August of 2011.
Okay, so over the last 3 years, there may have been vacancies, but there's been no increase in the overall head count.
Correct.
And part of this increase I see in that line item is for a new person, but that's filling a slot that's been budgeted in the past?
Correct. There's also firefighters that have step raises also. So, I mean,
The 1.5 plus the 3?
well, the step, sometimes a step is as much as 5%. Not all of them are in a step. If you're at the height, well, after 7 years, you're at the top pay, and then you only get the contractual increase.
Okay, I'd like to add that to the circle back list, Mr. Grabowski. Thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Polonsky?
Thank you. I'm looking at the minutes from the Public Affairs and Safety Committee, and it says that the committee went over some questions and there's some answers too about the fire department budget, and I was just wondering if those had all been addressed here. it's from the 27th. There's just, I was just curious to know if there's anything that we didn't bring up that might be of interest. Okay.
I'll speak.
Alderman Bryan.
So we spoke at a high level. We obviously didn't go line item by line item. We talked about the wireless alarm system and some other bigger ticket items, and those were all addressed. In regards to salary, we did discuss that, and some of these other details we didn't discuss. So to answer your question directly, have all of our answered at the Public Affairs Committee meeting been answered? Yes, but some of these other details we did not dive into.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you. Just a question about the actual head count of 33 versus a budget, 32 versus 33. How are we covering that right now? Are we doing that through overtime?
Correct.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about what the current staffing is on each shift, just for an education standpoint? How do we handle that in each firehouse?
Yeah, each firehouse is staffed exactly the same, other than Station 1 also has a battalion chief, who is the highest ranking officer on a 24/48 shift. But each station has an engine, a truck, and an ambulance. The engine's staffed with 3, the truck's staffed with 2, and the ambulance staffed with 2. That's our minimum staffing on those.
And if there's somebody sick or somebody out, we're calling in overtime to make sure we get
If
those
it gets
numbers.
if it gets below that number, if it gets below 11, but there's actually 19 people, I'm sorry, 15 people assigned to each of the shifts. So we allow 3 people off per day on vacation or a Kelly day. So sometimes there's only 2 people off, 1 person off. So if someone calls in sick, we still have our staffing at the right number, so we don't, there's 14 assigned to each shift. And then we can go down to 11. If it goes below 11, then we'll hire a person back.
Okay.
On the fire side of it, the contract medics are handled differently.
Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Healy?
Thank you. A question related to the fire service in general, not necessarily budget related. For every 100 calls that the Elmhurst Fire Department responds to, and by a call, it could be ambulance, it could be fire, whatever. For every 100 calls, what percentage of those are mutual aid calls where we're going somewhere to assist somebody?
It's a small percentage, but I don't have that number. I can get that number for you and get it out to you, but it's not a large percentage.
Under 10%? Not, I mean, just
We
gut
go,
feel?
that we go out of mutual aid?
Yes.
It's probably less than 10%, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Alderman Morley?
2 questions. One I forgot to mention the first time, or asked the first time. Where are we in the process of hiring that person? I assume much like police, there's a training issue, and then there comes a go, no-go sort of thing.
The list, the way the list is established, both police and fire, it's a 2-year list. Every 2 years, we renew the list. We have 1 year left on the list, and right now, we have 3 eligible for hire. So it's just a matter of working with the city manager and getting the go-ahead to hire that person.
And follow up, you mentioned a Kelly Day, did you say?
Yes.
I'm unfamiliar with that.
Kelly Day is a work reduction day. Firefighters work on average of, their average yearly work is 2,696 hours. And so they're called Kelly Days out of, I think, old fire commissioner out of Chicago at one time. And so they're allowed Kelly Days as work reduction days. And they're still, what happens is the FLSA hours, and we have a 27-day cycle. If you work more than 204 hours in that 27-day cycle without having a Kelly Day or a vacation day, we have to pay overtime on that extra 12 hours.
Okay. Alderman Levin?
Is there a relationship between the hiring of that vacant firefighter position and the amount of overtime we're incurring? In other words, if we had that firefighter, would we be decreasing the amount of overtime?
Yes.
And, I mean, it seems like the longer we wait, the more overtime we're paying. Is that basically it?
There's like a breaking point on there because obviously they have a firefighter. It's about, salary plus benefits. It's right around 100, 140%, somewhere around there. And the overtime is 150, time and a half. And so it's not every single day that we need the overtime. If we get below that minimum staffing, then we have to hire the overtime. So there are days when, on that shift where the firefighter is short, we don't hire overtime back. Majority of them, yes, we do.
Alderman York?
Yeah, just kind of a question in general, but I'm assuming that we're not the only fire department that has high overtime, and has there ever been any research done involving, say, 2 or 3 or 4 fire departments that are, you know, centrally located, going together and hiring one full-time firefighter to kind of help this problem amongst more than one department?
There's been discussions. In fact, I'm on a committee right now with the DuPage mayors and managers as a fire service representative on consolidation cooperation, trying to look at different ideas. What are some of the other alternatives that are out there to reduce costs and at the same time maintain service or make service better? So, but there becomes a lot of issues on that as far as labor agreements. That becomes an issue.
Okay.
Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. Regarding item 1001, is any piece of that full-time increase due to any promotion or raises that are not part of the 3% contractual portion?
I don't believe so. I'd say no. I mean, what we do is we sort of set a spreadsheet up of all the firefighters, and there's no promotion there. The only thing that's on the non-represented employees is that there was a percentage put in for all non-represented employees this year, but there was no speculation of a promotion.
Thank you.
Because actually what happens, when you get the promotions, the number doesn't go up, the number actually comes down, because the person moving into the next rank is paid at a lesser pay than the person that was in that rank.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood that. I thought before step raises were in here, but now they're not in here?
Step raises, yeah, for all represented employees. They're non-representative, myself, Jeff, the deputy chief, and the 3 battalion chiefs are non-represented. We're not part of the bargaining unit, so there is no step raise.
Ah, okay.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to wireless radio. Any questions on this?
Just an update on how it's going.
It's going well. The process to get everybody switched over was a little tougher than we anticipated, but at this point we have 480 radios on the network, and we are making all our projections at 450. So as new businesses open up, new businesses come to town, they're also being put on the radio system. So we're at 480 radios right now. It's worked well. As far as the false alarms due to telephone lines, reduced to basically 0 because we don't have that issue anymore. The system's been very reliable. We have a contractor that maintains it for us. We pay him a small fee for each radio per month, but it's worked out well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Braham?
Yeah, to Alderman Polomsky's previous question on what was discussed and if all of our questions were answered, if you can talk, because I know we talked about this in committee, if you can speak to when is the break-even point from the investment we made in the wireless alarm systems compared to where we are today?
The true break-even point was could be possibly 2 years based on the revenue, but the system we set up was we borrowed the money from the CIF, and we're going to pay it back over 5 years at $120,000 per year. And this will be the second year. We really didn't start paying it back until we got the system sort of fully on board. So 1 year of the $120,000 has been paid back to the CIF. This year will be the second year. But even with our $120,000 payback, there's still a positive revenue source. I think around $130,000. Does that sound right, Tom?
229.
150,000.
Thank you.
Alderman Healy?
Thank you. Where is the revenue stream? Can you, or somebody tell me where exactly?
And what page it is?
Yes.
Page 100? Page 100, I think it shows it at like 489,000. But then we have to pay a fee to Ducom, who does the monitoring of that, and we pay a fee to the contractor who maintains the system, installs the radios, and maintains the network.
What line item?
Yeah, it's 341, 2600.
Got it.
Follow up? Thank you. So 489,000, I think, was the revenue. So we paid the CIF back 120,000. We've got approximately 169,000 in expenses. So this thing's revenue positive already.
That's correct. Yep, correct.
And that incremental revenue is going where? Into the general fund?
Correct.
Thank you.
I mean, our thought was we use it to offset dispatch costs because these alarms are causing dispatch costs, and so try to offset some of the Ducom costs is, you know, but it's just going to general fund. It's spent however we desire it to be.
And that positive 150 was in this current fiscal year. Next year, it'll be $200,000, a little over the net to the general fund.
Thank you.
Alderman Lavin?
It's not really, this question's not directly related to this, but the Starcom 21 that you were talking about, is that scheduled to be completed in 2012?
Now, we're probably, the funds are actually in this current year's budget, but it's not going to be implemented until next year's budget. So those dollars in there will be moved forward into this year's budget. But it should be completed this next coming fiscal year.
And police and fire get converted at the same time?
Police will probably go before fire will.
Okay, thank you.
Any last questions? Okay, civil defense? Any questions related to this? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the police department. Give a minute to change seats.
Like this new seat configuration.
Chief, would you like to give us any highlights?
Good evening. The fiscal year 2012 and 2013 Police Department budget strives to maintain and continue providing effective and efficient public safety services to the Elmhurst community. The Police Department is a 24/7 operation that delivers a variety of public safety services to the citizens and businesses of Elmhurst. This proposed budget was designed to provide the best possible public safety services based on the current economic challenges. One of a number of the goals for this fiscal year is to refocus on community engagement. This approach will help us build an operational understanding between our police department and the community. It will foster open communication with the intent of weaving a philosophy of trust and understanding into the fabric of police-community relations. Our focus will be to build positive relationships with the community by being accessible and approachable. This can be achieved by the day-to-day contact members of the police department have with the community. We will emphasize the importance of professionalism, respect, and compassion. We will continue our current community engagement efforts, such as DARE, Peer Jury, Citizens Police Academy, Explorers, Alive at 25, Operation Lifesaver, Seniors and Lawmen Together, along with our ongoing collaboration with the school district, park district, Elmhurst College, community organizations, as well as the city's Public Works Division, Fire Department, and Building Department. Essential to the police department's core mission of providing public safety is our responsibility to enforce laws, ordinances, and the investigation of crimes. We will continue to seek opportunities to enhance our ability to effectively and efficiently prevent, respond to, and investigate criminal activity. This can be accomplished by seeking out training opportunities, reviewing investigative strategies, taking advantage of technology, continuing mutual aid compacts, collaborating with other police departments, and engaging the community as a force multiplier whenever possible. We will continue to react to citizens' concerns regarding unsafe traffic conditions and criminal activity in both a proactive and responsive manner to provide overall safety to the community and enhance the quality of life. We will also continue to hold ourselves to high ethical standards and strive to adhere to the professionalism that our community expects and deserves. We will continue preparations for upcoming challenges, both known and unknown. We are preparing for the NATO summit coming this May. We have pre-planned our ability to respond to both planned and unplanned events and disasters. We are committed to seek out the best qualified candidates to become Elmhurst police officers by maintaining our high professional standards in the recruitment, testing, and evaluation process. Finally, we will continue to be responsible stewards of the budget by continuously reviewing our expenditures to search for cost savings opportunities while still striving to maintain a high quality of public safety services.
Are there any questions regarding the police department? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you. I know it seems like a small line item, but 60-01, animal control, what exactly does that cover now that we're no longer assisting residents with trapping and
Was that
removing?
6001,
Yeah.
Alderman?
Yes, 60-01.
So that particular line account now covers fees for animal impounds, veterinary costs associated with that, and disposal of deceased animals, supplies that we use as well.
So we've redirected funds that we were using to help residents trap, say skunks or raccoons, or was that someplace else? And this is just what it's always been.
Well, we've reduced this line account in that we're not doing any trapping any longer. As you know, we have a preferred vendor that we've had for 2 years now. But we do also continue with other animal control duties that we have in the past. Stray dogs, deceased animals that were hit in traffic, roadkills as they're commonly referred to, and associated other types of animal control duties that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Wagner.
Thank you. Dominic, Chief, pardon me. Line item, pardon me. I'm looking at it on one sheet and it doesn't have the line item. It's the $230,400. It's made up of two different costs. One's for some remodeling of some lockers.
You're talking
Another
about
is
the
for-
capital improvement fund,
Yeah.
Alderman?
8023.
And which
Thank
there's two projected capital improvements. One's for the replacement of the lockers in both the men's and women's locker rooms at the police station. And the second one in there is for the conversion of our current pistol range to be converted to accept rifle rounds.
Yeah, I remember this coming up, last couple of years. Where do they go for rifle training now? Do they?
Right now, we have, we did have two outdoor ranges that we sent our officers to. The one has no longer available to us. They're cutting back on the number of agencies that utilize that range. That's the Kendall County range. We are in negotiations with trying to get another outdoor range in St. Charles. That's in process at this time.
Has anyone, and maybe this is more for manager, but does anybody talk to the Midwest along 294 there, Maywood Sportsman Park?
Maywood Sportsman's Club, we do our shotgun training there, but
Okay.
they do not have a facility to accept the rifle round,
Oh,
which is
they
a
don't.
5.56 round, commonly referred to as the AR-15 or the military round.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alderman Braham.
Thank you. 3 questions. First one is on page 140 and back to salaries, 1001 as well as 1002. 1001 full-time is showing a projected of almost $7 million, 6.9 approximately, where the previous year, 11-12 estimated, is at 6.5 approximately, so a difference of a little bit over 400,000. What is the difference, or what is the rationale for that difference? Is that filling a vacancy, or where's that come from?
Well, what we're currently doing, we're currently in contract negotiations with the labor union, so that would involve any type of percentage increase that would be negotiated. We're also trying to trying to fill some vacancies we currently have in the police department.
Approximately how many vacancies?
We currently now have 3 vacancies.
Okay, and then line item 1002, the part-time. Alderman Gutenkopf mentioned animal control on the subsequent page. Was the reduction in previous years due to not having an animal control officer any longer, and therefore we're about even for where we were in 09, 010?
That particular line account, Alderman, for part-time, the majority of that is part-time police officers. We do also have a part-time records clerk that's in that mix as well.
So the animal control officer was not included in there?
And crossing guards are part of that as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question is again on page 140, 3029. It's really a small change or amount, but fuel, it seems like the projected is a couple $1,000s less than what we actually hit this year. And with gas prices seemingly always going up in price, are we getting these funds from a different area, or why are we projecting it $2,000 less out of a total of $4,000?
This particular line account of 3029 for fuel is specifically for the police department's generator, which includes also the pumps for the underpass. So it's not associated with vehicle fuel.
That makes sense. Last question is on page 141, which is line item 60-11, conferences, seminars, and training. It seems like over the course of time, we've budgeted in the past for $48,000, and that's the proposal for this year, but we've never hit anything over $37,000. Would it be appropriate to maybe tighten our belts on this light item and budget for maybe $40,000 or $35,000, since we've never moved past 37, and at least according to the budget book?
Yeah, you're correct. We haven't moved past that. And the reason for it is we intentionally reduced the number of training hours we would have liked to have had over the last several years due to the economy. That was one of the areas that we in the police department had decided to cut back on. We would like to this year reinitiate our efforts in training, since we have fallen behind considerably over the last 3 years in reducing the expenditures in this particular line account.
So there's planned increase in training then?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Alderman Palomsky.
Thank you. I'm looking at line item 6031, grants. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the budget from 11-12 with 83,000, but then the estimated was 0. And then I was just wondering how do you come up with the 58,000, and what is that?
This particular line account was created several years ago as a placeholder.
Okay.
We vigorously and diligently go after grants. Many we anticipate because we've had them year after year. Others come up throughout the course of the year. So what we decided to do is create this grant account so we can estimate, based on what we've done in the past, what we anticipate receiving grant money for now this fiscal year, so it doesn't show a deficit at the end of the fiscal year. So this particular grant account now is the Illinois Department of Transportation Safety Grants, which we've been receiving for the last several years. It's our understanding that those grants will still be available this year, and because of our past track record, we fully anticipate to receive those grants once again. That also includes for DUI, speeding, seatbelt enforcement, and Operation Lifesaver as well, who's involved in that. But as I said, as we go through the course of the year, there may be some grants that become available or made known to us, and we'll go after those grants too. That's why you see it zeroed out, though. Does that make sense?
I think so, although I'm just wondering about, under expenses, not, receiving them, so.
We do also book a corresponding revenue for that. So on the grant lines in the revenue budget, there are included those dollar amounts.
Thank you.
Alderman Pezza. Thank you. I have 2 questions. Page 140, 3018, the DUCOM line. I was under the impression that as the years went on and we had more participation, that perhaps that fee could go down. Is that not the case?
It has gone down from what we had projected it to be, but it's still slightly going up as they bring on more agencies. However, there are still contractual agreements with their unions that we have to contend with as well.
So it still could go down, we just are basing it on what we know today.
Yes, and as Chief Kopp pointed out, the preliminary estimate that we had was more than what it actually came in at, and that was because of these consolidation efforts as they begin to come online with additional agencies.
Okay, thanks. And just a curiosity, page 141, 6005, car allowance. What is a car allowance? What is that for?
6005, Alderman?
Mm-hmm.
That's mileage reimbursement for departmental personnel who use their own vehicles to attend training classes. That includes any parking or tolls that are incurred. So if we send an officer to, let's say, Hanover Park, we'll pay for their mileage to go back and forth there rather than come into the station and utilize the vehicle here.
Okay, thanks.
Alderman Haley?
Thank you. Same question for you, Chief, that I asked Chief Kopp. For every 100 calls that the Elmhurst Police Department goes on for anything, what percentage are mutual aid where one of our guys or ladies are leaving Elmhurst?
I would say it's much less than 10%. That's a difficult variable to put your finger on. For instance, if there seems to be a traffic stop in an adjacent community of a retail theft or something, and our officers share that channel, as we do with Oakbrook Terrace, all officers will go down there just to assist the Oakbrook Terrace officers. They do the same thing to us. We do have our K-9 unit who goes out quite a bit to other agencies when he's on call, when he's on shift, but that's reciprocated by those other agencies who have K-9 units. When we're in need for one, we'll call them. They'll send their officer with the dog out when our dog is off.
Would you say that that's a 50-50 proposition, meaning for every time we go help another agency, some other agency's coming in to help us, or are we going out to help more than they're coming in to help us?
I'd say it's 50-50. I don't see us having any disproportionate officers being assisting other agencies than what they do to us.
Can we quantify that? Is that something you track, or is that something that's quantifiable without?
I couldn't give you an answer to that. I think at this time, for me to answer that, it'd be difficult to drill down any data that we have that may reveal that. I'm going on my past experience and anecdotal evidence of that. I don't think it's disproportionate. I'm very safe to say that.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Dunn?
Yeah, two questions in the second section under employee benefits. Item 2011, can you tell me what that is? It's a large expense item that's been escalating over the last couple of years. And also 2007, workers' compensation. What's the description on those line items?
The 2011, the employer contribution to property tax, that is the city's tax levy, the mandated tax levy for the city's contribution to the police pension fund. It's how we have to show it in the budget. We show it as a revenue item, and then we show it again as an expense of the police department.
Okay.
So it will go up and down depending on what tax levy we need for a particular year. You'll see the same thing in the fire department, same type of line item.
I did notice that also. Yeah.
The workers' compensation is just that for injured employees. It's the dollars that are paid for injured employees.
Okay.
And that, you know, the budget going out in future years, that's just an estimate based on prior year experience. I mean, we can't really predict the injuries, but we have to put something in there because in the nature of their jobs, that's what happens.
Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you, Chair. Line item 421-1006, sick payout. We had a budget of 175. We're estimated to spend 211,500, and then back down to 185,000. Can you talk about what that is, how it's administered, a little bit of detail about it?
We try to estimate how many officers will be retiring from year to year, and that's the sick payout for those officers. For this fiscal year, we anticipate possibly one supervisor rank officer retiring and a potential of 3 officers. Last year, we had a number of officers retire. Chief Neubauer, Commander Lucchini, and so on. So we did have a number of officers retire.
So that's, again, that's the payout when somebody leaves Elmhurst for the accumulated sick pay that they've gathered over their entire career, or for how, is there a?
Their entire career, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
But that, if, make,
But
Go
may
ahead.
I just clarify, it's a maximum of 90 days.
Okay. One other, can I?
Go ahead.
If you don't mind. On the capital side, we were talking about the firing range for the rifle. Do we have an expected return on investment if we were to go ahead and do that, since we're avoiding the cost of having to travel? Do we have a feel for that?
well, that's relatively difficult to have a return on investment because of the initial cost of it. I think the real return on investment cannot be equated to dollars and cents, but it can be equated to the proficiency that the officers have in utilizing that rifle if need be.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Bryan.
Thank you. My question is back to the car allowance. Looking at other departments, fire, for example, it doesn't have the line item of car allowance, and I'm assuming that each of the departments, fire as well as public works, are making trips for seminars and training, et cetera. Maybe this question's more for Maryland, but how are the other departments handling these costs within the budget?
You know, most other departments, I hesitate because I don't want this to sound wrong. I think there is more training that goes on in the police department. Again, I think it's the nature of their jobs. And there is often training at various police departments. And you may have a specialized unit, and somebody in that unit is going to go to the Lisle Police Department and have a special training. So there's a lot more there. There simply are more people. Same with their service officers. There's quite a bit of training there where people will use their own cars. So it made sense because of the volume for us to have a separate line item. You're right, you don't see it in most of the other places. Generally, we just added into the 6011 line, training, conferences. So if I drove to Naperville for a conference, that's where you would find it in the finance budget. There just isn't that level of activity where there is in the police department.
And if I can expand on that, we belong to a training consortium called Northeast Multi-Regional, and we're a northern region of Illinois, where we pay a certain dollar amount per year per officer to attend a variety of trainings, many of which are at no cost to the police department because you're a member, or the officer's a member. And as Marilyn pointed out, that could be in Lisle, that could be up in Waukegan, that can be in Orland Park, that can be out in Aurora. So the officers, some officers are traveling a good distance to get to some of this training that's available to us.
Perfect sense, thank you.
Alderman Levin.
3 questions, thank you. The first one is the line for training, the 6011 on page 141, does that include the academy if we hire a new officer, or does that fall under another line?
No, that would fall underneath that line account.
What's the cost for academy per officer?
Currently, I think it's around $2,300 to $2,500. However, that's reimbursable through the Illinois State Training Board upon successful completion. So we'll get that reimbursed back to us.
All right, thank you. The second question is, there was some discussion about elimination, I think it was of a records position, records clerk or something. I just, no?
I can address that. The position in the police department that's being eliminated is a sergeant, an unfilled sergeant position. We had initially talked about a records clerk, but I found out later that was taken out of last year's budget, not this year's.
And is that position elimination reflected in 1001?
Yes, it is, in full-time salaries.
Okay.
That is shown.
But the last question is not too significant, but and I don't know why it was done last year, but the printing services in 3050 and the public notices, was that a transfer from another line, or is that something new that we were doing in this fiscal year?
The printing services were created once the new fire station was built and they no longer were doing the city's printing. So we created that line account, I believe it was in 2010, to accommodate for the expense of printing within the police department that traditionally was done by the fire department.
Thank you, I remember.
Any other questions? Alderman Morley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about line item 1003, which is overtime. That runs about 14% when compared directly to full-time salary. Much like we asked Chief Kopp, could you give us a little explanation of that overtime amount?
Yes.
How we get to that?
That overtime amount is a compilation of many overtime causes, such as finishing an assignment, hire back, as we call it, to fill a vacancy for minimum staffing requirements, court, holiday pay, some training in there for all the police department employees.
Okay, follow up. Back to Alderman Levin's question about full-time salaries. How many, Chief Kopp mentioned that they have one open slot and they've got a couple of good candidates pretty much ready to go. I know that it's been seems to be been a little bit of a challenge with the police department to get folks that meet our standards. It's probably the best way to put it. How many are we down in our head count vacant positions right now, and where are we in the hiring process?
This fiscal year's budget accounts for 68 sworn personnel. Currently, we're at 65, and we have 3 vacancies. We have 2 officers that are in training right now, so that we're 3 down. And we have, I believe our list will be exhausted after the next Fire and Police Commission Board. However, we have already scheduled another list, and the testing date for that is March 31st, so we can establish a new list.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Alderman Haley?
Thank you. So 65 sworn right now, the 2 candidates, they're not sworn?
No, the 2 candidates are sworn. They're in
Okay.
field training.
So they're in the 65?
Yes, they are part of the 65.
So even with those 2 that are in the field training now, we're still 3 short from the authorized manpower?
Yes, Alderman.
And that does not include the sergeant, which we removed?
No, that does not include.
That's not one of the 3 vacancies?
No.
Thank you.
Alderman Gutenkopf?
Thank you. This seems like a small line item. 6054 travel. Looks like you're eliminating that after budgeting it quite high this year, well, compared to previous years. What was that line used for? It's on page 141.
6054 that we eliminated, I believe we merged that with another line account. Just if you give me one moment.
Go ahead.
Dominic is correct that we merged that. We saw there really wasn't that much activity on that line, so we merged that with the car allowance line, the 6005 that we just talked about. There really wasn't a need for 2 different accounts.
And they were used for the same thing.
Essentially the same thing.
Okay, any more questions? Alderman Dunn?
Quick question, same section as Alderman Gutenkopf, 6027. You have a line item for forfeitures as an expense. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Certainly. Those are monies that we receive from forfeiture of vehicles and miscellaneous items from drug arrests and used for equipment purchases and anti-drug equipment. These are monies that are taken in from arrests that are forfeited items, such as cars or other property, or monies as well. And it goes into a forfeiture account. And from that account, we can draw monies from there under specific guidelines to make purchases for either training or equipment specific to the reason that that money or that item was forfeited for. For instance, if we seize $10,000 as a drug asset forfeiture, that money has to follow the guidelines of the drug asset forfeiture expenditures. So we can use that to send officers to further drug training or update their drug training, or buy equipment specifically used for drug enforcement activities.
So it's generally for training and equipment expenditures?
Yes.
That we get to that, okay.
And those are monies that are brought in through arrests for a variety of criminal charges.
Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Panico, can you give me a little bit of understanding of, from a staffing standpoint, how we work on each shift? How many shifts, how many people on each shift?
Well, we have 3 shifts. One of them is a permanent, what we call a permanent midnight shift. And that shift, those officers work consistently throughout the year on the midnight shift, which runs from, we split our shifts in 2. Half the shift will come in at 10:30 p.m. for nights, and the other half will come in at 11 o'clock, 10:30 to 6:30, 11 to 7. That way officers are always on the street during what you might call a shift change, and each of the other 2 shifts follow that same format. Then we have a day and afternoon shift. Those 2 shifts rotate every 28 days, for instance. The day shift will be on this day shift for 28 days, and then rotate to the afternoon shift at that point. So days and afternoons flip-flop throughout the course of the year. Our shifts are staffed with the day and afternoon shift with 12 police officers and 2 service officers and 2 sergeants. And that's other than the midnight shift, which is staffed with 13 officers, 2 service officers and 2 supervisors. We also have our community-oriented policing program officers currently, which has 1 supervisor and 2 officers. That's where we've taken some of the officers to continue to staff our patrol, which is truly the backbone of the police department and provides day-to-day services. And then we also have our investigations division, which is the detectives. As a detective commander, one of those detectives currently is assigned to the drug DEA task force downtown.
And in terms of overtime, at what point is overtime mandated on a particular shift? So on the days and afternoons, you'll have 16. Is there a point, you know, do you always mandate to fill to 16, or is there?
Well, there's minimum staffing levels. It doesn't run each day. Each shift and each day of the week has different manning or staffing levels, minimums. Days, you'll have certain days of the week which our staffing minimum is 6. Others, it'll be higher. Same thing with afternoons. Some days are 8, some days are 9. Nights, it's the same way. So each day of the week has its own staffing minimum that we try to attain. If someone will call in sick or is away at training and we have to fill that minimum staffing, that would be a higher back, as we call it, and that would constitute overtime for an 8-hour shift to make sure that we have minimum staffing. Then there's finishing assignments. If an officer receives a call of a shoplifter holding at 10 o'clock and that officer's scheduled to get off at 10:30, the arrest, processing, paperwork, entry of any evidence that's there easily can take several hours. We want our officers to finish that particular arrest. We do try to cut back down as much as we possibly can, but sometimes it's just not possible. Then also part of that overtime is court time. An officer goes to court under off-duty time. They have minimum hours that they get paid overtime to attend court.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Alderman
Yeah.
Leonard?
Yeah, I just am trying to understand one line. The forfeitures on page 141 list the amounts that, under an expenditure, and I know we have a income line on, yeah, if I had my glasses, it'd be easier, page 101. But I'm trying to, I'm not sure how it's an expenditure. I mean, we forfeit the cars, and I would expect to see that there's some cost to process that, which would be the expenditure, and there'd be a larger amount that would be the income. This looks like the amount for the forfeiture expenditure is the same as the costs, and is the money just rolled in somewhere else? Because it doesn't, unless it's what you call a contra, or, well.
Well, you are correct.
Marilyn, you want to take that?
Marilyn?
I could see.
There is a revenue when we get the cars or the money that's sold, that's turned into dollars that then the police department can spend, as Chief Panico said, for very specific items. And that's the expense side then. the expense side, when we buy that in-car video, thank you, that in-car video, that expense is going to go on that forfeiture expense line because that was our revenue source.
But what it seems to me then is that it's like that's a free account, meaning you can spend it on whatever you want because you got the money.
No.
Well,
No, it's
Restricted.
It's very restricted. It's restricted, one of our new terms.
yes, under the,
It's not a
Yeah,
contra,
yeah.
it's restricted. It is restricted. I don't know all the rules and regulations, but is a very defined type of expenditure.
oh, you mean under the forfeiture statute?
Yes.
But it seems, even though, and I know that there are certain things that can be brought under the forfeiture statute, but you just put it under forfeitures, when's the decision made in terms of how that's going to be spent?
Well, as you are correct, Alderman, in that the processing of some of these vehicles that are forfeited, there are costs involved in that. Title transfers, maybe some towing fees, maybe some mechanical repairs that would be necessary in order to sell the vehicle at a higher profit. So we'll gauge that, determining whether or not that investment will pay off. So there are expenditures, for instance, with a forfeited vehicle that we have to pay out of this account in order to, once we are given the vehicle through the court system, now we have to transfer the title, maybe we have some repairs to it, and then we have a higher resale value. But then the sale of that vehicle, that money then goes back into forfeiture, and any expenditures as far as training or equipment has to meet the guidelines specified by law.
Can you let us see what, for instance, in this current fiscal year, the money's been used for?
I don't have that.
Not right now.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd have to go through the check register to find out what we've used it for. I can tell you on a number of occasions, or consistently, it's exactly as I've explained it to you. I know that in the past, we have sent officers to training with monies out of this account.
okay, I'll follow up on myself on that one. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Alderman Pezza?
I may be mistaken, but was the dog, the drug sniffing dog, purchased with those funds?
A percentage of it was, yes.
Okay.
Again, because of the specific guidelines to that. For instance, if I wanted to send our emergency response team who does search warrants for drug arrests to a specific training, I'd have to articulate what percentage our team does those types of operations. Say, for instance, that turned out to be 25%. According to the guidelines, I could only spend 25% of the cost from the drug forfeiture because that's all they do is 25%.
If that helped, but.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, thank you, Chief.
One comment. Nice job at the pole position this year.
Very much. It's a team effort, truly
You did
is.
a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to administration and elected officials, pages 114 through 117. City Manager?
Mr. Chairman, is this the point where somebody joins me from down there to talk about elected officials?
No. We'll leave this to you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Be the senior elected official. Oh, wait, he's busy.
A couple of highlights that I would like to make before we get into questions on a couple of the accounts. One, I'd like to point out on the newsletter, we did rebid the printing for it this year, and we're able to save some dollars. So that's reflected in the budget. And then with professional services, there was some money budgeted for strategic planning sessions, which was not used last year. We did rebudget that this year. The other cost in that $17,500 is InfoTrack background checks, which we use for taxi cab licenses. So just pointing those two items out. And then the last one that I would point out is the full-time salaries and wages. As I indicated in the February 27th address, that does include the full-time position of assistant city manager. And so I'd like to address that now to the council. I think that's I know that's the right direction for the city of Elmhurst to move, is by making the assistant city manager full-time. This is a discussion that the council and I started about 8 months ago during the interview process, actually, when I was a candidate for city manager, and the council asked me my opinion on the need for the position. And my response was that I would need to evaluate the overall organization and the position responsibilities before I could truly respond to that. And since then, I've had the chance to evaluate the organization. And as I said before, as presented on the 27th of February, the net full-time positions are being reduced by 1 from 266 to 265. And that in between then and now, I had provided to you an example of how we can fund the assistant city manager through an overall reduction of approximately $300,000 in salary and benefits costs by rearranging some personnel and eliminating 2 unfilled positions. More importantly, though, the city will gain an improved economic development efforts because this includes the position of the assistant city manager. We are always looking for greater efficiencies throughout the organization. This has been my direction to the department directors, and it continues. They all continue to do that, look for efficiencies throughout the organization. As proposed, the assistant city manager's primary responsibilities will be economic development coordination. The position will consolidate and direct the building and planning departments, along with directing the consultants that we use for recruitment, land planning, retention efforts, and also staffing of the Economic Development Commission. If you can recall, 2 years ago when the budget was cut, the positions of Economic Development Director, Economic Development Manager, Planner, part-time office assistant, and administrative intern were all removed from the budget at a savings of approximately $362,000. Since then, the direct economic development efforts have been the responsibility of the city manager and the part-time assistant city manager. And for the past 2 years, the city has had a part-time assistant manager, as I just said, and I'm advocating continuing this effort and funding a full-time position. We're in a unique situation where Mike Kopp has been filling that role of part-time assistant manager, and I'm recommending that Mike Kopp stay in that role. Mike has proven his success over this time through a number of projects, such as restructuring and implementation in the Utility Department of Public Works and the wastewater treatment plant consolidation, the planned and reorganized City Hall services counters, which include integration and relocation of the Planning and Zoning Department to the first floor building department area, which is now known as Community Development. He developed and co-authored the Elmhurst Strategic Plan for Economic Development and developed a strategy to evaluate the IT department for better organization and service delivery. In addition, his skills in management, problem solving, organizational development, and change, combined with his institutional knowledge of Elmhurst, all confirmed to me that he's the best option for the city of Elmhurst. Now, in my first 8 months here, I've understood 2 priorities from the city council. One is to analyze and assess the personnel level, and the second is economic development. This is without us going through a formal strategic planning process, which I believe we should do, but I do believe that these two to be accurate as the 2 directions. To accomplish this goal of continued success in development, I feel the assistant city manager is necessary. In addition to the economic development responsibilities, the assistant city manager will supervise the divisions of human resources and information technology. Continuing these responsibilities with the assistant city manager will allow me, as the city manager, to work strategically for the entire organization. The past successes of the city of Elmhurst and the pressure for Elmhurst to remain successful requires Elmhurst to be proactively involved in many aspects of local government. If I, as a city manager, were to be involved in the details of all aspects of the organization, I would truly have difficulty finding the time to develop a future vision and goals for the city. Additionally, I'm expected to develop and maintain positive relationships with the multiple organizations in the city, county, and regionally. And considering the complexity of the city organization, the assistant manager is necessary so that nothing falls through the cracks. Pardon me. Lastly, the assistant city manager will be responsible for special projects which either do not fall within any one department or other departments will not get to for some delayed period of time. Some examples of these would be right now functioning as liaison to Kane McKenna and organizing staff regarding the development of TIF reports. Is liaison to the ComEd for all reliability issues, including the Stormwater Task Force, and staff support to the ComEd subcommittee, including vetting of the subcommittee recommendations back to City Council. Also, with the limited time left on the existing TIFs, projects need to move ahead promptly, and we hope there will also be future implementation of TIF districts. And then also, as I mentioned before, attend meetings of city, county, or regional importance to represent Elmhurst. Often those overlap. So with that said, I would request that the City Council approve this position in the 2013 budget and gladly answer any questions. Thank you for that time.
Okay. Questions? Alderman Leader?
I would like to frame this issue in the larger historical perspective. Elmhurst is presently in the backwash of the Great Recession, the worst economic calamity since the 1930s. We've gone through the last 4 years like a train going through a dark tunnel, and we have emerged into the daylight at the other end to face an entirely different country. A city cannot go backwards. Standards once set must be maintained. What sufficed for the past may not be adequate for the present. The government of Elmhurst is based on the progressive era model, composed of a city council whose purpose is to make policy, a mayor whose role is to preside over the council, as well as be the ceremonial head of government, and a city manager whose job is to carry out the policies of the council with competence and consistency. The lines of demarcation between the three are abundantly and historically clear. Some 8 months ago, after a nationwide search, we hired a new city manager. One of the reasons we hired him was that as an outsider, he could bring an entirely fresh perspective to Elmhurst government. Clearly, we would not have hired him if we did not have confidence in his judgment, leadership, and ability. If we do not now allow him to make command decisions as he thinks best, the opinions of well-meaning amateurs would be preferred to those of one experienced professional. He cannot manage almost 300 full-time and part-time city employees by the loosest cooperation of 14 aldermen and the mayor. There are difficulties in arriving at a single command, but they are much less than the dangers and inefficiencies that must be faced if we do not achieve this. Jim has requested us to appoint Mike Kopp as a full-time city manager. He has made the necessary personnel and dollar cuts in the budget to create room for this position. The overall city payroll will be less, not more. It'll be less, not more, even with Mike as assistant city manager. This is not what I might have done or you might have done. Frankly, I do not have the specialized knowledge and management skills to pass judgment. The only person in this room that does have those highly specialized skills is our city manager. This is about Jim making a request based on 8 months of intense study. Not to do this is a vote of no confidence in Jim's leadership and judgment, and in his 20 years of successful professional experience. He believes that through more efficient management, he can deliver more services for fewer dollars. Give him the chance to prove his point. We all know Mike Kopp. He has compiled unrivaled institutional knowledge during a time when we have lost our longest serving and most experienced people. In fact, he has more experience than any other individual in city government today. He has been with us for 30 years as a firefighter, fire chief, and assistant city manager. He has fulfilled all of those roles with honor and efficiency. There are those who say that because we have not done something in the past, we must never do it in the future. But all things change with time, and many things in a very short period of time. We must not allow ourselves to oppose something simply because it is new and unfamiliar. The strength of this council is its willingness to adapt itself to changing times. Hiring a full-time city manager has less to do with what we may have done in the past than what we should do in the present in the interest of the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Alderman Levin.
Everyone likes to follow Norm. Very nice presentation, Norm. I just want to supplement a couple of things that Norm said. The city manager, in my opinion, has the prerogative to set the staffing structure of how to best operate the city. He's our chief executive officer. Although it's something new to Elmhurst, Tom Borchert himself was advocating this position. I'm more concerned about what the budget is. And as has been pointed out, we're going to get this position in without increasing the budget by eliminating some other positions and moving some things around. So I'm not afraid to answer to the public of why we would hire a new assistant city manager when we're here and we know. I will disagree a little bit. I don't think that the city manager is the only person who understands that. I know that in many cities, it's not only customary to have an assistant city manager, particularly one of our size and sophistication, but often there's another position called an assistant to the city manager, and that's part of the career path that you work up. So we have had neither a full-time assistant city manager nor an assistant to the city manager, and this is was unusual under the Borchert years. I think that in terms of Mike Kopp, he does have unique qualifications. Alderman Leader points out his experience with the city, but this is at a time when we not only have a new city manager, we have a relatively new mayor, we have an entire new school board except for one, a new school superintendent, an entire new district board of education cabinet, a new librarian, a new police chief, parks director, hospital president, relatively new Elmhurst college president, and I could probably name some other ones, but it's good to have someone that has this kind of institutional knowledge, because I can tell you when I call up and need something, if it's not Alderman Mulliner, who has been senior on the council, it's good to know that someone like Mike Kopp is there to answer the question and give the perspective, which I know I don't have. I've had people call me and say, well, why aren't we doing this nationwide search for the assistant city manager just as we did for the city manager? Well, in a sense, we've already done that search, and Mike Kopp was one of our finalists. He was our #2 candidate. So he's been well vetted. We spent many hours talking with Mike Kopp, plus he's here and we know how he's done the job. No surprises about whether he's going to be able to do it or not. He's highly skilled. He's done an excellent job in terms of making this administration as strong as it is. And sometimes, in my experience, when you look at staffing, you can say, let's go out and build a job description and hire someone that meets that, or you take someone and say, here's some unique talents, and build the job around that person. And I appreciate that the city manager is trying to, in good faith, answer exactly what the assistant city manager is going to do in terms of staffing and in terms of economic development. But I'm confident that we are already getting a lot out of Mike Kopp, and it's the right move at the right time within our budget constraints without having to pay additional to get it, and I'm going to support it 100%.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Alderman Bram?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. This discussion seems to have gone a little bit off into the weeds. This is not about is Mike Kopp or any other individual appropriate for the ACM position. That needs to be vetted at a different time frame. I don't believe, actually I'll say it stronger, it is not appropriate to vet that during a budget discussion. That needs to be recommended by the city manager and approved with consent by the council at a later date. I believe that's according to Chapter 2. What I want to touch on is this budget line item, which is on page 114, line item 1001. Before I touch on that, to date, I have not received any information that says this position has been created, the ACM position has been created. We have not voted on a resolution. We have not made any decisions publicly on having an ACM position within Elmhurst. I do not feel that adding additional dollars in a budget line item is giving consent or approval for the reorganization or the restructuring, if you would, for assistant city manager position. I won't go into the debate of if I feel there is a need. I do hear and respect City Manager Grabowski's request for an ACM position. As Alderman Leader has stated, we have survived very well without an ACM over many years, if not decades. And I personally think that we can move in that direction still today without suffering any consequences whatsoever. But my only question in regards to this budget line item is that the increase estimated is from $290,000 to $364,000, which to me, if you include raises and everything else, it does not seem to have the total, if not partial, ACM position. So where is the total funding for this proposed ACM position if it's not in line item 1001?
What Marilyn's going to hand out is a breakdown of salary allocations for administration, for building department, and for finance department. And it involves a number of positions that are spread across a number of accounts. So I think this will answer your question, Alderman Bram.
Well prepared.
I believe that we did hand out the administrative one previously.
You did. So just to read through this, it seems like it's funded, it is being proposed to be funded 70% in the general fund, and then the other 30% from the municipal fund, municipal utility fund.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Alderman Haley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple points. First, I agree with Alderman Bram. I don't think anything we say or do tonight is going to be construed as saying Mike Kopp is our guy, that there would be another process for that. But I do respect the fact that City Manager Grabowski gave us that information and said, here's what I would intend to do with the position. So, like I said, I agree with Alderman Bram that this is not the time or the place to vet Mike Kopp, in my opinion, but it is the time and the place to talk about whether we want the assistant city manager in the budget. Last year, when I raised the issue of having the assistant city manager position in the budget last year, I felt very strongly that I didn't feel it was appropriate to have that position in the budget last year because we were still going through the process of bringing a new city manager on. We didn't know at that point if the new city manager would agree, disagree, and even if even if the new city manager agreed or disagreed, assuming that the person agreed, that we would have literally the time to bring an assistant city manager on in terms of last year's budget. But I felt very strongly that it was the city manager's position to tell us that once he or she came on board. City Manager Grabowski's now been with us 8 months. To me, that's enough time to make an informed decision as to how he wants the organization to look. I think we've all been pretty involved as assistants, excuse me, as City Manager Grabowski has gone through that process. I look at it and with managing the people and the dollars he's paid for the position, he's eliminated a job as a result. I think there's probably more to come as if the ACM job comes on board. So I'm going to stay consistent to what I said last year. I'm going to wait to see what the city manager wanted to do. City manager's in place. He's telling us what he wants to do. I concur. I would support the position in the budget. Thank you.
Alderman Grutenkauf?
Oh, thank you. I actually have several questions sort of surrounding the addition of this position, and some of them relate to positions that we're eliminating and how operations are going to be covered for that, and some of them relate to some of the consultant fees that we're paying. So maybe I'll start with the consultant fees, because we added consultants, you may all remember, to cover some of those positions that we eliminated initially. And when I look at the consultant fees that are in the planning and zoning budget, they're not really reduced any significant amount. So we eliminated full-time staff, and we added 3 part-time consultants. And part of our justification at that time was to make up for it. So let's start with this. I think we need to go back and very seriously consider what those consultant fees are if we're adding a full-time staff member to cover the duties that City Manager Grabowski has laid out for us tonight. And I'm not comfortable keeping those consultants if we're going to add this position into the budget. So perhaps we could start, City Manager Grabowski, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that.
Yes, thank you. As we move through the assistant city manager position full-time, I think there will be an opportunity to reduce those costs. I can't accurately state what those dollars reduced will be. I know there was a budgeted line item. I would think that we will not hit that maximum if the assistant city manager is in place to take some of those duties. But I would also say that the consultants that we've hired have very unique skills and abilities, which is why we hired them for particular reasons, whether it's land planning or recruiting. And I would hope that the assistant manager would learn from them as we move along and then further be able to reduce those into the next fiscal years.
Follow-up, I'd like to add the consultant fees that are in the Planning and Zoning Administration budget. I think it's $109,000 to the circlebacks.
Okay.
Right, if I keep going. A very specific question, is this position partially paid for by cutting the sergeant position?
It's an unfilled sergeant position right now, yes.
So by eliminating that position from the budget, is that part of the structure of how the additional salary is going to be accounted for?
There was a position in planning and zoning, an assistant zoning administrator that was reduced, and the assistant city manager would also be able to help in that capacity. So that was one of them. And then just looking at the overall structure of the organization, that sergeant was unfilled, And in talking to then Chief Neubauer and also involving Chief Panico, there's a relief sergeant that fills in between the shifts. And we felt that that was a strong enough position to provide the services that are needed. I mean, if you ask anybody, would we like to have more staffing? Absolutely, across the board. You know, is this a move that we can make? Yes, I think it is.
Any other? Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. I guess I'll start by asking, what is the total amount? We see percentages, but I have not yet heard an exact amount of what this light item will be to fill this position you would like to create, salary, and then separate what the benefits and pension would consist of?
I don't think we have that number right now, but we can get it to you as far as adding the benefits in.
What is the actual salary, just the base salary then,
The
that you're
salary
accounting
range starts at 108,000, and I don't recall what the maximum in that range is.
So you just, when we plug numbers in, isn't there a specific number we would have plugged in?
Yes, we plugged in the bottom of the salary range.
It was the 108 we plugged in.
Correct.
Okay. I would also like that information regarding the pension piece. Because I think when I hear what is think about what's historically clear, I think what's historically clear, what I see going on, is that funding government pensions are one of the major contributing factors to the financial crisis going on in government right now. And I just want to be sure that that burden that we're going to place on the taxpayers regarding the pension piece of this position we've never had is very thoroughly examined. I am not in favor of funding this position. Not sure that I'd prefer to have this position over a sergeant, especially in these times. We also raised the levy $190,000, and I'm thinking, when you look at that salary plus pensions and benefits, perhaps we could have avoided raising the levy by that amount. Talking about passing, it's not for us to pass judgment. I think that's exactly what I was elected to do. That's my job, is to pass judgment on decisions such as these. And if I'm supposed to be a steward of the taxpayers' dollars, I think I should absolutely pass judgment on whether or not this full-time pension benefited permanent position fits into what we can do at this time. Once again, I think that pension piece is key, so if we can get that. And I agree with Alderman Gutenkopf, the consultant. I believe between the three, we currently fund $235,000 a year for the three consultants, which a lot of what you described in this position is basically what they do. So, I mean, it's nice to say that eventually we might be able to sift some of that out and reduce some of that, but unless it were more of a firm commitment or an actual change in the budget to balance and reflect, I'd like to, as Alderman Gutenkopf said, circle back and discuss that further also. So I do have some concerns still about the financial piece of this, and obviously we're circling back, so it's a good thing.
I want to make sure that we're clear on the circle back, so we're going back to consultants. Is that what you want to circle back to?
Whatever.
That's what the request was?
It was, well, we already circled back, I believe, to 1001, the full-time piece. Did we not?
No.
Oh, then I would ask for that also to be included as a circle back.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Just one comment that I have to make, and that's on the levy. The last levy that we passed, the $190,000, was specifically targeted at making sure that we could cover if the hospital does not get the property declared tax exempt, and that's being put into a restricted fund. I want to make sure that I'm using the right term. Is it since we're changing the terms around, it's being put into a restricted fund to pay them back if that tax-exempt fund comes back. So the actual levy increase is actually 0 for this year. It is an increase, but it's only to cover that portion of the tax levy. Okay, let's move on to finance then. Oh, wait, we got some more questions.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to your point, Mr. Chair, is that 190,000 was new growth too. It's not just an additional levy, it's on new growth. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to finance. Marilyn?
I'm not used to talking about my own stuff. Talking about everybody else's stuff. You know, really, the finance department is, there's nothing new here. It's very basic. It's status quo. I will hit a couple of items. The full-time line, 1001. You'll see the breakout in the handout just earlier provided. So you know who's in what line. You may see that line has fluctuated over the last couple of years, and that was basically with some transitions between people moving to the administration budget, people moving to the building department, public works people coming in, public works people then moving over to building. We are, I think, at a point where we are not going to have those moves any longer. So it's a status quo budget, status quo as far as people are concerned. Besides payroll, the biggest item is banking expenses. And that we continue to look at to see how we can shave costs there. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, we will move on to claims. I know it's getting close to 10 o'clock, but when I look at the rest of this, what we have left to cover tonight, I don't think there's going to be a tremendous amount of questions. I hope I'm correct. I believe we could get through this, which would pretty much finish off the budget for this evening, and then we'd be able to move on next week to the circle backs. If that's okay with everybody, if I don't hear anybody objecting, we'll try to get through it real quickly.
Yes, please.
Okay. Claims.
Claims on page 174. You see two line items, auto liability and general liability. The dollars there for the estimated reflect actual, what we do believe will happen this year. In the out years, it's very difficult to project, but that's an estimate of what we think will happen in the future years.
Any questions in the area of claims? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Pezza?
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm clear on this or understanding it right. Obviously, liability comes into when there's an accident or damage to a vehicle. That's a claim. Or will the referral regarding the take-home policy, could it potentially have any effect on these line items?
No, these are liabilities. These are going to be payments. I see your point, and in a very small way, yes, you are correct. It very possibly could, if an employee had a city take-home car and there was an accident. Yes, that's going to show up on that line. Whether, to take care of a lawsuit that may result, that's going to be on that line, yes.
Okay. Any additional questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to senior services. Senior Services?
You can see here, things are pretty much status quo. So I'll entertain any questions you might have in this area.
Any questions? Alderman Gudenkauf?
We've had lots of conversations over the past several years about the taxi subsidy and the disabled taxi subsidy and alternative programs. I'm assuming that because we haven't heard anything recently, there's really nothing new to add about that, and we're just going to continue with the same programs that we've been offering.
I believe that the Senior Commission is looking into different programs right now, and I know that they're working with the Finance Department on that. So once we can come to something where we're ready to take it to a committee, we'll do that. But as of right now, we're not proposing any changes.
So these slight increases are just assuming more seniors, or just slight increase into the amount of usage that those programs are going to get?
The senior taxi program is a very popular program. It is a very inexpensive way for our seniors to travel around Elmhurst. So it is a very popular program.
Any additional questions? Alderman Levin?
I just want to see if my recollection is correct on are the seniors still paying $1.40 a ride?
That's correct.
It's been about 20-something years since we raised that.
More than that. I've been here 22 years.
Like 1985?
So I think it was, I can get you the history, but I believe it was sometime in the early 80s, possibly, when that was last changed.
And that's not a need-based program. It's if you're, so pretty soon I can use this program.
You can, yeah. And it'll be cheaper to come here than it is to drive your car.
Okay. You know, at a certain point, I think the Finance Committee ought to look at that in terms of just how the costs shake out. It's actually cheaper than a bus ride to get a taxi ride, and if it hasn't been raised since about 1985, to be conservative, it's probably worth the Finance Committee looking at.
Just a sidebar, that happens to be, that goes over to that committee, because they discuss the taxi services.
And that's exactly who I was talking about.
I knew you were. I knew that. Any additional questions? Alderman Haley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment, though. I certainly understand that if something hasn't been raised since 19 whatever, that it might be a candidate to be looked at. However, when I look at the expenditure of $67,000 budget, and certainly that's, you know, that's a nice piece of change, but it's, you know, we're dealing with much larger numbers, and for something where we're subsidizing senior transportation, I honestly don't know that that's, you know, even if we raised it 50%, is it going to be a real big dent? I mean, it'll go through proper channels. It'll, you know, look at the Finance Committee, but I just don't know that that's something that I'm uncomfortable with.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to Health Services.
Health Services, the ambulance service is a direct reflection of our contract with Metro Paramedics. Also the mosquito abatement, there has just recently been a new contract the council approved, and those numbers reflect that new contract.
Questions? Okay, let's move on.
The contingent line item at 50,000 is there just for that purpose, just in case. This year, you can see we went way over that, but that was because of the storm last July. There were, I think, a couple of storms.
Any questions? Okay, cable television?
Sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Alderman Bram.
Just for clarification, how is this used differently than our working cash fund?
The working cash fund, I would say, is there by city policy for use by essentially any fund that needs assistance, where this money is specifically in the general fund. You know, we used to put, let's see, 90,000 on that line. Came down a couple of years ago to 50,000. It is more an emergency fund. The working cash fund, yes, it was emergency, but it came about only when you wouldn't have gone through to the working fund necessarily to take care of storm-related expenses. Working cash fund came in when at the end of the day, the bottom line said we don't have enough money. That's when that came in, and it can be used by other funds. If it was the utility fund, they have access to the working cash fund. That fund has access to that.
So, a follow-up? So in this instance, you stated 1112, it was due to the storms that we see an increase in that line item. I assume that, well, maybe I shouldn't make this assumption, but if you go through every line item of the budget, somewhere over, somewhere under budget, and therefore net is pretty much a balanced budget. So then when is this actually utilized? When we're under budget as a whole in the general fund or over budget as a whole?
It's generally utilized when the expense doesn't neatly fit somewhere else. Now, you could say storm expense could be in the Public Works Fund.
Right.
That is true. But we wanted to segregate it partly because segregating the expense for the possibility of getting FEMA dollars, grant dollars. We've used this fund not just for those types of things. The last few years we've had, whether it's snowstorm or windstorm or rainstorm, we've had it. In the past, we used it, some of you may recall, when the Katrina disaster, the city matched funds that were raised by the city, by the residents of the city. So it's been used for other things other than emergencies, things that just don't neatly fit anywhere else, or we want to segregate so they're not forgotten.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, cable television.
Cable television, the biggest line item, professional services. Those are the services that's Elmhurst, it's our town. It's the taping of all of our council meetings, of this meeting right here. It's Jeannie Urick and her group.
Okay, questions? Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. Does that include, like, do we have a contract with them that says we'll do X amount of hours per month for you, which would then incorporate all these little special shows we've been having and film? How does that work?
You know, it's evolved over time. Jeannie Urick has run that group as essentially somewhat a department of the city, but they are all contract. There is no payroll implications there, or pension implications. And she manages that in terms of if the symphony wants something special, she works with them there. On an overall basis, she will get direction from the city manager. If she feels something is going on or she's getting a request that's beyond what we normally do. So within general parameters, she manages all of that. If something comes outside, then she'll go to the city manager and ask for permission to video a certain show, etc. The line item revenue is substantial, is probably well over 400,000 from cable franchise fees. And that's the funding source for this particular budget item.
So I guess my question would be, if there were particular programs we have been doing that we find nobody cares about or watches, or if there's a way to even monitor that, would eliminating those have any impact or be able to reduce what we spend with this, is my point?
I would say that yes, you can eliminate if there are certain things we no longer want to video certain types of programs or run certain types of programs. So certainly yes. But that essentially is what the cable franchise fee is there for.
Okay, just curious, thanks.
Alderman Gutenkopf?
Thank you. What else does the cable franchise fee pay, since its revenue is substantially higher than this expense?
Then it is just in the general
fund.
Yes.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to transfers.
There you see the transfer to the working cash fund, the $190,500 by council policy, repaying the working cash fund for the loans, a 5-year program. You can see 4 years here. The last year will be 2015. The transfer to debt service is the general fund's share of the debt service for, it's probably 2 or 3 bond issues.
Questions? Okay, let's move on to the capital improvement fund.
On page 184, the revenues, as you may recall, a third of the home rule sales tax is allocated to the capital improvement fund. Tom, remind me, 25% of the telephone utility tax and 80% of the state income tax. Those are the main sources of income for the capital improvement fund. The transfers you see on page 186, those you would see right from the 5-year capital improvement fund. The only one, no, you would even see the debt service. So everything would be tied back to the capital improvement fund. There are no expenses directly borne by the capital improvement fund.
Any questions? Alderman Levin?
Yeah, can you identify the source of the miscellaneous income on page 185, line 9800, the 243,200?
This amount refers to some of the dollars that the city has already incurred in the intersection improvements relating to the new hospital. And so this is the amount that we've estimated so far as the hospital share that needs to be repaid.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to general fund revenues.
I think we're just going to open it for questions.
Okay, questions. Alderman Wagner?
Thank you, Chair. Where is the, maybe I'm not in the right spot, but for the wireless alarms, where is that 409 or 490? I can't remember.
It's on page 100, about 2/3 of the way down the page, 341.26.
Thank you.
Alderman Graham?
Thank you. A few questions, starting on page 99. I asked this in the beginning of the budget discussions before we hit the revenue item, food and beverage. In previous years, we were seeing a 5.5% increase in the last few years. This year, we're budgeting in my estimation, a much smaller increase in revenue of about 1% compared to the estimated for fiscal year 11-12. Can you please speak to that?
You are correct. You can actually see a little over 5% for the last couple of years increase. If you go back to 09-10, there was an actual drop in the revenues and stuff, mostly due to the economy. We did jump up almost 6% in 10-11, and our estimated is almost 5.75% estimated increase. But with that dollar, it is a conservative estimate of the budget of the increase. We've pretty much budgeted a 1% or 0% increase back when the economy was down. We kept it flat, but it's a 1% conservative estimate.
Okay, so no reason to adjustment, even though the last 2 years in a just as bad economy was over 5% increase on each year?
It's a conservative estimate.
Okay.
Stuff, and I have no idea with as far as the economy, if it'll continue to grow.
Okay. Page 100, and this is both line items in regards to gasoline for the Park District and the school district. I do understand that they utilize our pumping station, if you would, on a yearly basis. Both of these seem to be lower than this current fiscal year. For Park District, it's at $84,000 for this fiscal year estimated, and $60,000 for the school district. Yet, even though gasoline prices seem to always climb, our revenue stream seems to be going down from both of those government bodies. Is there a different agreement in place, or are we getting better deal on gas, or?
I think it's just an estimate of, there are no changes in the agreement that I know of. It's just a matter of an estimate of, by the time we prepare this budget, of realizing what's happening with gas prices and everything else. It's just an estimate.
Thank you. And my last question, again on page 100, under permits 300, plumbing. It seems like we always have zero revenue source for plumbing permits. Does that mean we don't do any plumbing in the city of Elmhurst? Or what's the rationale between having zero and compared to electrical, where we see 8,000, and building obviously is significantly more at 650,000?
I just don't recall on that line. Is it still showing up because there is a number in the 2010? So we don't eliminate a line item until it totally drops off because we need it to balance at the bottom.
But we do plumbing inspections and...
Yes, but now this is permits, so not inspections. So I'm going to need to get back to you on that as to where they are, if we've just allowed them to go into another line item. I just don't know.
Okay.
So I need to get back to you on that.
Understood that this is permits, but a permit then would, result into an inspection after the work is completed. So that's why I bring that up.
Right, and there are inspection expenses.
Correct.
On the expense side of the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Page 98, 01-90. I'm drawing a blank, that 200,000 number, the property tax rebate.
That's the dollars that we're setting aside in case we have to pay back the hospital if they get their property tax exemption.
So that's
It's a
Okay.
restricted fund.
Thank you. That's why it's its own line item.
Exactly.
Alderman Haley?
Follow up to Alderman Pez's question. Is there any update or status, well, I assume there's no status change that we had heard about. Is there any update on what's going on with the hospital and their tax status?
This one is in regard to the land underneath the hospital. We have not heard any change as of yet. We can check with the county to see what kind of schedule they're on, but we've not heard anything.
Thank you.
Alderman Gutenkoff?
Thank you. On page 101, line 37114, museum foundation donation, does the projected number include the sunsetting of the current agreement that we have with the foundation to offset costs for some of the part-time staff? It sunsets this year. The original, if I may, the original agreement with the Elmhurst Historical Museum Foundation was that they would fundraise and support programs at the museum that did not receive city funding, but that the monies they contributed would not be seen as replacement funds. When the city cut staffing 2 years ago, the foundation stepped up, redefined the agreement with the city and agreed to offset some of those personnel costs with the understanding that that agreement would sunset in this coming year. So does this budget then reflect that?
The budget this year, the 68,300, includes the part-time position. So that part-time position will continue, but with a cap of, I believe it's 25,000, it might be 30,000, but that includes everything. That includes the total package. Now, there are no benefits, there's no pension implication for this person, but it includes all other taxes. So yes, it is still in this number.
And then projecting forward, what's the 75,000 for 2013-14 based on? And is that just a placeholder at this point?
It's a placeholder because the foundation has said they're holding things tight to the vest. They're not committing to anything beyond one current year. So the 75,000 is a placeholder in anticipation that there will be funds provided by the foundation.
And then, I know this isn't exactly the revenue side, but in the museum budget, for the coming fiscal year, we didn't include funding for that part-time position.
Yes, we did.
We did include funding for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is in there, yeah.
Any additional questions? Alderman Dunn?
Thank you. A significant portion of the revenue stream to the city comes from the state. My question is, what's the current status on timeliness of payments from the state? Do you have to budget to account for that? I know District 205 has to manage through that also. How are we doing that in the city?
Sales tax, they are current on that, and that has never been an issue. Income tax in the past, that's one that they have held, and there has been an issue. They're not current yet. They're probably still maybe 3 months behind, but that's better than where they were.
Where were they?
They were about
Barn
5
arrears?
months behind, and now it's probably 2 to 3 months, so they're moving in the right direction. There really aren't any other payments that are being held. We don't budget for that. It's just, hopefully they will catch up. It's more a cash flow issue than a budget issue at this point.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we've made it through. City manager would like to say something?
I would, and it's in response to Alderman Bram's question about the increase in revenues and how we project that. I have always, and I know that Marilyn and Tom have always taken a realistic but conservative approach to projecting revenues and been pleasantly surprised at the end of the year, rather than trying to get out ahead of that and being unpleasantly surprised at the end of the year.
Hey, based on the budget calendar that we have in front of us, next week should be a budget hearing, the public hearing, and if everything goes well, we should be able to do the circle backs, I believe? Or do you want, are we holding on those? Is the intent to do the circle backs next week? Okay. And then we should be able to get the budget approved in the appropriate amount of time. Thank you for everybody's hard
Excuse me.
work.
What, is there a, I know people have called them out and I've written them down, but is there a master list of circle backs that?
Yes, they have it at the,
Okay.
I have them in the.
and they're in the minutes.
Yes, we have them, and what our intent would be in the Thursday packet would be to list all of those and any, if there's any information that we feel we need to provide to help in the discussion, we will provide that.
Thank you.
Okay. There's no more discussion. I look for a motion to adjourn. Alderman Healy, seconded by Alderman Gutenkopf. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.